and thank you for sticking with us through all of this. Chuck, you introduced yourself first last time, so I'm gonna introduce myself first this time. I'm Katie Ginn. Obviously, you've seen a lot of me today and yesterday. I work at the TTAC at Radford University, and I've got my friend Chuck here, who does the same thing. Hi, Chuck. Anything you want them to know before we start?
Well, I just want them to know that really appreciate everyone sticking with us, and we've enjoyed it. I know that tomorrow you'll get more into the science content. The past couple of days been focused mostly on co-teaching and that type of thing. So tomorrow and Thursday, it looks like science is on tap. We're going to finish up the co-teaching part with talking a little bit about co-planning for co-instruction and co-assessing in the inclusive classroom. So co-teaching, you know, we've talked about this now for a while. It's a service delivery option where there are two and sometimes more educators who together co-plan, co-instruct, and co-assess a group of students with diverse learning needs in the same general education classroom. And this comes from Lisa Deeker and Wendy Morawski's work back in 2013.
Yeah, and so, oh, I'm sorry, Chuck. Did I?
Go ahead. I'm good.
All right, I don't mean to rush you. So co-teaching, when you're going to hear a lot of different definitions of co-teaching in your career, and they're going to be appropriate. Those definitions are probably going to be appropriate to the situations that you're in. We're going to try to settle on one definition just for our purposes today. When we talk about co-teaching in this session, and I think for most of this conference, what we're talking about is an equal partnership between two licensed professional teachers, one of whom is a general educator and one of whom is a special educator. And the purpose of that is to have this partnership be a place where teachers can work together to provide specially designed instruction for students with disabilities. We're going to send you into breakout rooms here in just a second. We're going to ask you to spend about 10 minutes together thinking about and discussing questions that you can access on slide 2 of that digital workbook, okay? Slide 2 of the digital workbook has a few resources. It has a handout called the preliminary discussion questions. These are for the beginning of a co-teaching relationship. And then also the initial planning considerations for co-teaching and support facilitation. So these are 2 linked documents. When we send you into these breakout rooms, we're going to have you consider and talk about a couple of questions. These questions are also in the workbook, so you should be able to see those there. So if you have worked with a co-teacher, did you cover these questions in your early work? Also, if you've not started co-teaching, which of these questions address your personal priorities as a teacher? Again, that's going to be on slide 2 of the digital workbook.
So when you go into your breakout room, you won't be, well, probably you won't be with a co-teaching partner. But these are, we want you to just have a discussion with the folks which you may or may not know in your breakout room, but have conversations about these questions, because when you get back to school, if you're in a co-teaching arrangement with another teacher, these are conversations that you do want to have. So kind of think about these and bounce them off each other in your breakout rooms.
All right, so if you're ready, you're going to be headed into breakout rooms with 3 or 4 participants. So if you haven't met these folks yet, introduce yourselves, and then take a look at the questions that are on that slide number 2. If you've worked with a co-teacher before, did you cover the questions in the attached documents, the linked documents? If you've not started co-teaching yet, which questions address your personal priorities? And those rooms are opening now.
How did those conversations go, folks? Were there questions that you hadn't really thought about having a discussion with your co-teacher?
Not really. I've been doing this like with my science department for about 20 years. And everybody, and there's 3 main teachers I've been rotating through. And we all pretty know, we know kind of what our roles are and who needs to do what and when somebody needs to jump in, and we tag team, and there we go.
That's great.
That's ideal.
Seeing comments about it was good to get to talk to everyone. And then, you know, I'm just going to throw in my own personal thoughts here. That's what I kind of miss about being on campus at JMU during CTA. So maybe we'll be able to do that next time. Okay. What we're going to think about just for a second is, what do we each, whether we're a content area teacher or whether we're a special ed teacher, what do we each bring to the co-teaching partnership? So some of the things that we may feel like we have expertise in, what might be one of our strengths as an educator, might be instructional design. It might be content knowledge, might be classroom climate, being able to make that instructional environment conducive to learning for all of our students. It could be assessment. It could be in the area of assessing student learning, assessing whether students are on task. If you want to share, just drop that in the chat box, one of these 4 different areas of instruction. It won't be anonymous, I'm sorry. So if you feel comfortable sharing that, that's fine. Just drop it in there. Just curious about how you feel about your particular gifts as an educator. And we've got folks all across the spectrum here. That's great. Thank you very much for that.
And I think it's probably notable that it's not necessarily going to break down according to whether you're a content area teacher or a special education teacher. We sometimes think, oh, well, I think it's easy to assume that the content area teacher is always going to claim that the content knowledge is their biggest strength. And indeed, I'm sure it is one of your biggest strengths, but you probably also have some experience coming up with flexible and creative designs for students with all kinds of different learning needs, creating a warm and welcoming classroom environment for all students. So I think that it's important to know that our skills, the skills that we bring to bear in a classroom, don't always break down according to lines of specialty, right?
Yeah, that's right. Okay, now we're going to get into some of the framework that we're going to talk about today as far as planning instruction. So what you see on your screen, this is a sample of the VDOE co-teaching template. And don't get scared, because we're not telling you or encouraging you or asking you in any way to use this particular lesson plan template. But we've developed this to kind of guide folks in thinking about how to plan for co-instruction. We realize that your school division or your school may require you to use some other type of lesson planning template, platform, and we don't want you to change what you're doing. What we do want you to think about is when you're planning for co-teaching or collaborative teaching, think about what each teacher is doing throughout the entire class period. We want you to think about what type of formative assessment strategies you'll be using. How will you make sure that the students are on task, that they're attentive? How will you ensure that any accommodations, any curricular modifications, and most especially any specially designed instruction that's needed during that class period is being implemented? We want you to think about which of the two teaching partners will be involved in different aspects of instruction as you move through the lesson. This lesson template is in your digital workbook. It's on slide 3. So if you want to access it and download it, you'll have it. It's in a Word format, so it's expandable. And we just wanted to share that with you. But the important thing is to think about what each teacher is doing as you move through the lesson. It is set up so that there is, for each lesson component, beginning with the anticipatory set, going through the lesson, guided or independent practice, closure, all the way through the lesson, there is a column, column 2, where you can insert the co-teaching approach that you're using at that time, and what each teacher, the gen ed teacher and the special ed teacher, is doing at each segment of the lesson. And note that the co-teaching approaches will dip, or you're able to differentiate in the co-teaching approaches at each step of the lesson, because it's really not very effective or efficient to just stick with one approach from start to finish in a lesson, because you're going to be doing different things at different points. So it might be that you would have team teaching when you first begin the lesson, but you might move to station teaching, or you might move to alternative teaching. You might move to parallel teaching, but you'll be able to move back and forth between co-teaching approaches as you progress through the lesson. As you develop your lesson plans, we want you to think about how you're going to present the lesson. You're going to think about what the student needs are, and you want to think about the purpose for each activity, for each co-teaching approach that you decide to use at that point in the lesson. And we want you to be intentional about meeting the needs of the individual students. So you're going to need to know what their accommodations are. You're going to need to know what specially designed instruction might be called for as you go through each part of the lesson, and have these discussions with each other as you build your lesson plan for each day. Because we just finished the session on the frame routine, we chose this sample lesson, co-teaching lesson plan, because it includes the frame routine. Now, it is a math lesson rather than science, but if you'll look in the first part of the lesson, one teacher, in this case, in the second column, the gen ed teacher is discussing how the inequality symbol determines whether the circle is closed or open, and which direction it is colored on a smart board. The special ed teacher at this point, and this is a team teaching approach, presents the inequality and asks students to work with a partner to solve it. If you look at the second paragraph in that first segment of the lesson, the gen ed teacher is leading the class in co-construction of the frame inequalities. The gen ed teacher during this time is modeling construction of the frame on the smart board with students answering questions and completing their own frames. And you'll notice just in the under the special ed teacher column, which is the far right column, the special ed teacher is also distributing partially completed frames to students with visual, motor, or other learning differences that prevent them from completing a frame that will be an effective study tool. So we've got some differentiation in duties here. We've got the special ed teacher modeling construction of the frame. This could be considered specially designed instruction for those students who need that modeling. In the next segment of the lesson, the guided and independent practice, we've got a station teaching approach being used. Students will be divided into 3 groups for the stations. Each student must complete a worksheet associated with that station. It will be turned in at the end of day 2 for a grade, and they can use their frame as a reference for each station. Closure for the lesson, they go back to team teaching here, and they develop the so what statement from their frames. And the special ed teacher at this time is asking what open and closed sign means, and when to flip the sign, and what is inverse operation. Okay, we'll come back to this slide a little bit later.
All right, so as we know, the IEP is the source of the information on the specific needs and learning goals of students with disabilities in your classroom. So those needs and goals will be an essential part of the lesson planning process. You're going to have that in the forefront of your mind as you sit down to start to plan. So in most cases, content area teachers are going to find that they're responsible for providing some classroom accommodations at the very least. So what might this look like in a content area classroom? You might see an accommodation in an IEP that says something like provide versions of class texts at AJ's independent reading level, provide access to voice to text for writing, for instance. Those are things that could impact a student in a content area classroom. So those are things that content area teachers are going to have to be mindful of. There may also be some goals that apply to content area instruction. So for instance, you may see a goal in an IEP that says something like given a text at their instructional reading level in a content area, MJ will identify the main idea and important details, right? It specifies in the goal content area instruction. So that could end up applying to some of the work that you do in your class. In a case like that, a special education teacher is going to be making the content area teacher aware of the goal and its implications for the students' work in their class. The special educator may support instruction on that goal or might provide that instruction in the general classroom as well. So either of those things could be happening. Either way, the special educator is going to be gathering data and goal progress and maybe consulting with the content area teacher as they're doing that. Finally, there may also be a need for some specially designed instruction that can be provided in a general education classroom. So let's say in a science class, this might look like something like pre-teaching unfamiliar vocabulary. We know that there's often a lot of unfamiliar vocabulary in a science class. So any sort of instruction that is designed to support specific students with specific learning needs around something like pre-teaching of unfamiliar vocabulary, that would really qualify as specially designed instruction. Another example might be direct and explicit instruction in maybe lab safety or equipment use, that kind of thing. Anything that's sort of more different or more intensive than what is offered to the rest of the students in the class as part of the lesson as designed. That's going to fall under that SDI category. So it may be the case that the general educator is providing some SDI with support from the special education teacher, or that special education teacher might be doing that instruction in the general classroom or ahead of time in another space. Any of those things could end up happening, but these are all sort of situations that could apply to a content area classroom.
And building on what Katie just said, pre-teaching is a great example of specially designed instruction that could be built into the IEPs for several students. One way to do this is through an alternative teaching arrangement. So you can see in this graphic, the teacher has a small group of students, and she could be pre-teaching vocabulary. She could be pre-teaching concepts. So particularly in like math and science, there could be concepts that a student might have difficulty with that really need to be pre-taught. And this small group of students doesn't necessarily have to be composed of all students with IEPs. If you have other students you know that might struggle with a concept or with vocabulary or some other component of a lesson that is coming up that day, this alternative teaching method and approach would be a great way to address those learning needs. And also, as Katie said, it doesn't necessarily have to be the special ed teacher. Typically it is. But if we're talking about maybe concepts in math or science, it very well could be the content area teacher is the best teacher to pre-teach those concepts to this small group.
Okay, so now we're going to get into some more specifics on how to come to the process of planning together. How do you plan a co-taught lesson on any topic for that's going to address the needs of students with and without disabilities? So there's really no right or wrong way to do this. Okay, so every co-teaching team is going to have their own approach that seems to work for them. But here's one suggested approach, one suggested sequence of decisions that you might make. So you may start with referencing the standards, right? What is it that we have to cover this year at this grade level? You might then recall a plan from a previous year, right? So you think about when it was this time last year, what were you covering? How did we address this topic in the past? I think as teachers, we're always looking back to what we've done in the past to try to adjust it for the group of students that's in front of us, right? So then the next consideration are the individual learning goals of students in your class. And when we talk about considering individual learning goals, again, we're primarily meaning those goals and learning needs that are described in the IEPs of certain students. Those are going to include things like accommodations, modifications, specially designed instruction, and also the present levels of those student skills and their goals, what goals they're trying to work toward in your class. So with that information in mind, it's going to inform your co-teaching approach. So you know what it is you want to cover. You know what some of the needs are in your classroom, what some of the goals are in your classroom. What's the best approach for how to teach this? And once you come up with your co-teaching approach, be it alternative teaching, parallel teaching, station teaching, maybe a little team teaching, any of those methods that you covered in a million different places, in a million different webinars, you're gonna then make a decision about who's gonna take which part of the lesson. So again, these steps might be slightly rearranged for your situation, but this is sort of a common sequence of decision-making that teachers take on when they are putting together their co-taught lesson. We're going to watch this in real time now. Here we have a video of two teachers who are planning for a middle school math class together. You're going to see several of the steps that I outlined on the previous slide. You're going to see those reflected in this video, but not all of them. So several of the steps are represented, but maybe not all. So as you watch, I'm going to ask you to consider what steps are they including in their decision-making process? And then maybe what steps do they seem to skip? Or maybe those steps are being completed in the background outside of this video. We don't see that part, but what are some considerations that they probably also have in mind as they're putting together their lesson? I am very hopeful that the sound will work when I start this video. Let me know if we have trouble with that.
Hi, my name is JoLynn Tabor. And I'm Lene Young. We're at Northside Middle School, Roanoke, Virginia. And we're just going to show you how we plan on a weekly basis. So what we do is she usually pulls the plans from last year, and I will come in and I'll have my booklet, and my notebook has everything that we did last year. I have notes on it and things that I've taken that we might need to change or modify for this year. So we sit down and together we look at each one of those pieces and we say, okay, what do you want to do? What do I want to do? And we separate the roles and so that two people know exactly what they're doing when they're going in the classroom.
Well, hey, JoLynn.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Good. Trying to figure out what we're going to do this week.
All right, let's plan. Let me get my computer up.
How do you think that, before we do next week, let's talk about first block. How do you think that went this morning?
I think it went well. The students were on task, and as we were walking around the room, they seemed to get it after a while. At first they didn't, but now they do.
Okay. Were you okay with me not doing the stations because we were running low on time and just spot checking?
Of course. Yeah, that was fine.
Okay. All right. Well, I printed out the plans for this week or next week from last year. So I thought we would look and see if that's where we're ready to go. Since we're testing on Friday on 6.2, 6.4, and 6.6, we are ready to roll into decimals.
I had that, and I brought that book with me because I figured we would be. So here's what we did last year.
Okay.
So we can use that to refer to.
Okay.
And I've already printed the study guide, and it's in there
Okay.
in their
good.
folders.
Good. We'll have them highlight the study guide.
Mhm.
You're really good at that.
Okay.
We'll have you highlight the study guide. I'm going to write that in here. Highlight, JoLynn. So while you're doing that, I'll walk around and we'll do the one teach, one assist on the highlighting and making sure they have their study guides. And let's make a list of kids if any have lost theirs by now, since we're on in. I think we're pretty good.
Yeah, I think they're all good because as I go around and check their binders, they've been pretty good.
Okay, excellent. Oh, by the way, Friday, let's clean out binders after the test. Okay. Let me add that in for Friday.
For tomorrow. We really like to make sure that when we come to our planning sessions that we're prepared. So I usually have my notebook from last year, which has all the testing and all the notes that I've made on students and things that we need. I have my planning book, and I also have the pacing guide that Roanoke County provides for us to help us to make sure that we stay on track.
She's good at keeping us on track. I bring my laptop that has last year's lesson plans and are able to move them right into this year's lesson plans to make it easier for us. I have our grade book so we can discuss the grades for the class, and also the paper that we can write on to make quick changes that I can put in later. To review 5th grade SOL's decimal place value. How would you like to do that this time? I don't have how we did that last year. I think we had the little place cards. We made a little flip chart with them, with the place value. Do you want to do that in two groups, two small groups, or would you rather I do something and you do something and then we flip flop? The where we both teach at the same time, two different things.
I'm thinking that we should flip flop. We should do parallel teaching on that day.
Okay. So I'll put PT here, parallel teaching. So one of us will do make the flip chart, and the other one will maybe work on how to say and how to write.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll do the how to say and how to write.
Okay, and I'll make the chart. And I'll also talk about what it looks like using the base 10. Okay.
Manipulatives.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think that'll take up the whole block. We could give them, I thought maybe I would pull up some 5th grade SOL questions, and that'll kind of trigger their memory.
Okay.
All right.
Are we going to do fast math that day as the alternative teaching part?
I think we should do fast math. I like our consistency of Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And I'm trying to remember to put the fast math up on the board. So I'll write that in, alternative teaching, fast math.
Everyone knows what One Teach, One Assist is. That's the most popular collaborative strategy that people use who are collaborative teachers. But there are many others that we can use. There's parallel teaching, there's station teaching, there's team teaching, there's alternative teaching. We have all kinds of different strategies that we can use. So as we plan our weekly lesson plans, we look and say what would fit best for each one of these days. And we don't want to always use One Teach, One Assist. There are two of us, so we need both of us to be working at the same time to get things done.
All right, the next day we have converting decimals into fractions, and then back, more practice with reducing. We know our kids are, they're getting stronger and stronger at that, and looking at ordering the numbers. We can do parallel teaching on that day too. Really, one of us could do converting into fractions and the other one could do ordering.
Or I kind of like the second day to do, I teach first and then you teach.
Okay, all right,
So,
one teach, one assist.
both teachers,
Switch out,
yeah.
one teach, one assist, okay. All right. Ottawa. Sounds good. By the way, I would like to notice that we did not plan our outfits at all. Work individually, error analysis of, okay, so last year, remember we had that extra day where we were able, while you were doing the alternative teaching with a small group, we cannot get into the computer lab because of benchmark testing.
Okay.
But I think that we can just move this day forward. And one day we can, if we have time, we can do small groups and they can get on the laptops and do some IXL in the decimal section.
We also have the laptops in my room that we can use too.
Okay.
So we could do a flip-flop
Okay.
classroom.
All right. All right. I think by the end of the week, I would like to do some sort of quiz, just a mini quiz, hopefully one that wouldn't take so long. And just to get an idea of, are they understanding their decimals? Not that we're not spot checking all week. But I think that'll work out.
So for the quiz on Friday then, would you like to take the Read 2 Kids or do you want me to take the Read 2 Kids?
Oh, I kind of liked how we shook things up a little bit last week. Okay. And in fact, maybe next, yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Yep, I'll take the Read 2 this time.
All right. So for Thursday then, do you think that we should do team teaching where we both teach at the same time? Because that's when we're teaching the new lesson on converting decimals into fractions and back. So we've reviewed like 5th grade things and then we're just starting the lesson for 6th grade. So I think if we team teach that day where we're both at the front of the board, I think that might be the best.
Okay, and then we can also pull out small group at that time if we need to.
On the side of the room or to the tables to the side as we see needed.
Yep, that looks good. Our classroom is set up so that we can accommodate whole class teaching. And then over here, we have some side tables where we can do some small group. We also have side tables on the other side of the room and over here. We have some computer stations located at the back for very, very small group individual work.
Now that we've shown you how we plan weekly, it's also important to talk about how we plan daily.
We like to talk about our students, how our lessons went and how they're going to go, what worked and what didn't, scheduling for upcoming activities,
IEP meetings, fire drills, things like that. Or, for example, when something didn't work right in the classroom that we planned, we like afterwards to talk about that so that we plan something different next time.
because we do have the luxury of teaching first block and fourth block together. So we have a planning period in the middle where we can make some changes and some adaptations. Most importantly, who's grading what?
We share the workload, that's for sure. That's what's important about having 2 teachers.
We love our students and we want to make the most of our time spent with them.
All right. Lots of positive comments about the co-teachers in that video, and I think that they're really well deserved. They're doing a really fantastic job, and hopefully you saw some of the steps in that co-planning process, not quite in order, not quite completely comprehensive, but some of the steps that we talked about, that decision-making sequence, hopefully you saw some of those steps evident in their conversations together. I'm going to turn it over to Chuck for this next part.
Okay, well, in the video you just saw, and I think Dr. Lee put it in the chat, that's on the TTAC Online co-teaching website. And these were two of our Excellence in Co-teaching team members. They are unfortunately no longer teaching together, but they were a great team. We realized that most co-teachers, or many co-teachers, I won't say most, maybe don't have that face-to-face planning opportunities, at least on a regular basis. So if you don't have that time already built into your schedule, we'd like for you to think about how you can make it work, even if it only happens maybe every 3 to 4 weeks. Treat it as sacred time. You shouldn't veer off course when you get together for these planning sessions and leave you without having accomplished the purpose that you intended. Options to consider might include setting some time aside on a regular basis, either before or after school. And then we have had some teachers that meet somewhere away from campus. Whatever you can work out, keep in mind that you'll want to have the data that you need to intentionally plan instruction and to meet the individual needs and the collective needs of the students in your class. You can have meaningful conversations about how you can design your instruction and allocate your time to meet those needs.
Right. So we are getting a few questions and a few comments about how smoothly they use their co-teaching time. So obviously they're pretty practiced at having done this. When you're first starting out with a co-teacher though, it can be harder to know how to parse out your time, what time to allocate to which aspect of planning. And so we wanted to supply you with a few resources that can help you with that portion of your work together. So here, you can find this on slide 4 of the digital workbook that we shared with you. These are all some linked resources. 2 of the resources come from the TTAC at William and Mary. They have a really helpful considerations packet on the topic of co-planning for student success. And it is just full of different resources, but we wanted to draw your attention to 2 in particular. The first is actually an agenda for planning your co-planning time. So how much, if we have an hour together, we're gonna spend 10 minutes doing this, we're gonna spend 20 minutes doing this, we're gonna spend 20 minutes doing this, and we're gonna end on time, right? Because that's the crucial piece of this, is that we all our time is always precious, and you need this to fit in with all the other things that you have going on. You're gonna have a lot of demands on your time as a teacher. So that agenda can be really helpful. There's also, we heard the teachers in the video putting together first a weekly plan and then working backward to the daily plan. So there we have a weekly co-teaching lesson plan template also from that William and Mary considerations packet linked for you to access in the workbook. And finally, we've provided you with the VDOE's version of the co-planning, the co-teaching lesson plan. Wendy Morawski has another version available that's quite similar. So you can take a look at a couple of different templates and see how you like them. But those are all, again, available for you on slide 4 of the workbook.
Okay, we have folks that were putting comments in the chat about using Zoom to plan, and that's a great idea. And I think we all have gotten pretty accomplished at using Zoom over the past year and a half. Also, Google Drive, Office 365. You can collaborate on lesson plans and leave comments and make suggestions if you can't get together face-to-face, in person, to do your planning, this is a great way to do it. This is Office 365. It works very similar to using Google Drive. You can just show comments when you pull up a Word lesson plan document and make suggestions about how to change. Because in this example, I put a comment in here, we should include these accommodations for students A, B, and C because it's specified in their IEPs. And I think the graphic organizers would be beneficial to all students. So you can do that as far as a collaboration tool to help you co-plan when you can't get together face to face. All right. In collaborative teaching settings, both teachers are responsible for student assessment. We've talked about co-planning. We've talked a lot about co-instruction over the past couple of days. But now we're going to talk a little bit about assessments. We want to know what students know: facts, vocabulary, rules, concepts, all of those things. And what do they understand? Do they understand the concepts and the big ideas? And we also want to know what they know how to do, what their skill set is. So, and we also want to know which co-teaching approaches would work well with each type of assessment. So Jim Knight, who has spent a lot of his life on research at the University of Kansas, and especially in the area of, well, he spent a lot of work at the University of Kansas on different aspects of research. And one of the things that he has put together is kind of a guide for informal assessment. And what we want to think about today is how we can use informal or formative assessments to make sure that our students are understanding what their learning targets are, their progress toward those learning targets. And we also know that when teachers understand how well their students are learning their content, they can make better decisions about how to adapt their instruction and the pace of learning activities in the classroom. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit hoarse here. So in that sample lesson plan template that we had, there's a place where we wanted to include formative assessment strategies and also a co-teaching approach that we could use while we're implementing those formative assessment strategies. We have a video, and Katie's going to introduce this.
Yeah. But before I jump into the video, I just wanted to bring your attention to some more resources that we have for you in that digital workbook. It's on slide 5. There's a link to a whole list of Jim Knight's, I believe, Chuck, that you compiled this from Jim Knight's book, a list of different approaches to assessment, informal assessment, that are fun for students, quick to implement. So that little handout is linked again on slide 5. So we're going to see some teachers who are employing some of these different strategies for formative assessment in this video. They're going to take us on a little tour of their classroom, and you're going to see that they're using a station approach to create these little formative assessment opportunities around a unit in their earth science class. As you're watching the video, keep an eye on how they vary the activities, and especially think about how they might gather data from these different activities. So it's really important when we talk about formative assessment that always the formative assessment is telling us something, right, that will inform our future planning. And so these teachers have examples of great ideas for how to engage students in different activities. How could those operate as assessment opportunities for the teachers so that they know where to go next as they're teaching.
This is a short video showing some of the formative assessments we use in our co-taught classroom for earth science. We're going to be presenting them today to you in a station format. First, we have some of the games we use. We use a game called Tip It. We have an electronic version of the spinner, but we'll put students in teams. They answer a question correctly. Then a person from the team can come up, choose a disc to remove, and then the next team goes, and so on until everything tips over. This is a familiar game to most people, Jenga. We've adapted it so that we have color-coded the ends of the Jenga pieces as well as the sticks. Once again, students answer questions correctly. They come up, choose a stick, and then have to remove the color-coded block. We've adapted a game here. It's called Spit It Out. It used to be called Name 3. And so we just have cards where that lend themselves to 3 things. And so we'll ask a student to come up, as this one says, name 3 types of wind. And we turn the timer over, and they have until the beads fall to name the 3 things. Hot potato we use a lot just for a really quick formative assessment. We have a few minutes at the end of class. Students will stand in a circle. We'll pass the potato around, and as it plays music, when the music stops, the student who has the potato has to answer a question. We have slate tables in our science classroom, so we're able to write on them with chalk. We use this both at the end of class for exit tickets, and we also use it for bell ringers at the beginning of class, where students will have a prompt of something that they need to draw or illustrate on their table. It's perfect for Venn diagrams and charts such as this with the phases of the moon. This is an activity called I Have, Who Has, and you start out at the beginning of the class with I have the first card. This happens to be about minerals. It says who has a group of minerals bound together. So the students have to be listening, and the person who has the correct card, which says I have rocks, then reads the next question, who have rocks? Who has rocks formed by cooling magma and lava? And so on through the cards until you get to the end. These are fibber cards. And if you notice the fibber cards, there are mostly player cards, but there are a few fibber cards in with these. You again hand these out to students. They don't show each other what they have. The person who has the fibber card is going to lie about the correct answer. And we use these with the ceiling tiles we have in our room. We have ceiling tiles that are painted with A, B, C, and D. So with the fibber cards, we'll ask a question and ask the players and all the students to go stand under the correct answer. The person who has a fibber card is supposed to lie. So that way we can tell which students are simply following those who they think have the right answer, or if they really have the right answer. Using those same ceiling tiles, we use a really inexpensive flashlight to shine, usually in a darker room, to shine onto the correct answer, or we have students just get up and go take a stand underneath the correct answer. We use 3x3 puzzles for vocabulary assessment. These are cards that have simply been cut up. The middle card has 4 terms or definitions around the outside, and students have to match up the term with the definition, the term with the concept, until they end up with a 3x3 card. Clicker cards are a web-based app that we found where you can set them up and ask questions. Students have a card, so you can see the cards have numbers on them, as well as A, B, C, and D. So we assign each student a number. We hand out the clicker card. When we ask a question, then we simply scan. Here I am scanning a scan. We simply scan the cards as the students hold them up, and the app will tell us whether or not they've gotten the answer right or wrong, and records it, excuse the bell, records it on the web-based site. And then finally, we use another web-based program called Kahoot. Kahoot is a web-based program that allows you to enter multiple choice questions, short answer questions, and students can answer them again using a smart device. We usually use iPads, but they can also use smartphones. And they answer the questions, and the Kahoot program keeps up with not only who got the right answer, but who got the right answer in the quickest fashion. So students compete with each other as far as right or wrong answer, as well as the quickness of their answers. So that's it for the formative assessments, and we will be adding in our summative assessments.
All right, so this part of our video is going to deal with summative assessment. And the first thing we wanted to share with you is how we use our interactive notebooks to assess what they've covered for each unit using the essentials that are put out by the state. So at the beginning of each unit, we set up our notebook where we have the essentials printed off from the state, the essential understandings and the essential knowledge and skills. And then they create a side in their notebook in which they're going to have an activity that they complete by the time the unit is done. The directions for that are also included in the notebook, and they stay in the notebook. For example, the first part, they choose two things from the essential understandings that they create a diagram about, or some kind of explanation, a chart, a graph to help explain that into a little bit more detail. The second part is the bottom where they're using the essential knowledge and skills, and they're going to complete one thing for one bullet, and they have some choices there. They could create and answer a sample question or problem. They could record the title of an assignment that they did well on, and how it helped them. They could record the title of an assignment that maybe they struggled with and what they did to kind of relearn that skill or to go back and review it. In addition to the essentials part within our notebook, we also have some other assessment pieces in the back, which include vocabulary review. So we set up a glossary. And so with the glossary, they have their vocab sheets, which includes not just writing definitions, but where they may be labeling a diagram or they're matching things. And then one last thing to kind of get, since we're now kind of in SOL review, we also have SOL weekly sheets. And what they do is they created a section for that. And we kind of tie this into a bell ringer. I'll kind of zoom in a little bit on this. But they have where they've got the days of the week on Monday through Friday. And so you can see Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday there. On the back, they have Friday and Monday. So the way this goes in the notebook is they would glue down the middle part, and then they would flip it over and over like that, where they would have Monday. And we go through the week, and each bell ringer each day goes with the week question.
Another way that we do our summative assessments is we use a student response system. We happen to use Mimeo products, so we use the Mimeo vote system, and this is just an example of what those student response handheld devices look like. We would, a lot of times we'll have multiple choice tests, so the students will each have their Mimeo vote and a hard copy of the test. And as they go through the test, it can be self-paced. As they go through the test, they can move back and forth through the little window here. It gives them the number that they're on. It records their answers electronically in the grade book for us. And then when students are done with their assessment, they're able to see their score immediately. So we use those for summative assessments at the end of units, but we also use them interspersed through our lessons for some more formative assessments.
And then the last thing we use is IA, or Interactive Achievement. And so that's a program that our school system has adopted, which really crunches the data for us and lets us know questions specifically that are missed, who's missing them, where we can look up and align them to which objectives and that kind of thing. And that's totally done with a summative at the end, and we use them for our benchmarks.
And one of the problems that we found that we've tried to fix with interactive achievement is interactive achievement does not, at this point, have a true read aloud option for those students who have the read aloud accommodation for testing. So once again, we use Mimeo and take our 9-week benchmarks and record them into the Mimeo program and read the questions and answers aloud, so that students who have the read aloud option are still able to go to the computer, take their tests on computer just like their peers, and get that experience of taking their tests on computers, but have the read aloud option as well. So we use our Mimeo votes or our Mimeo system for that, for our benchmark testing.
Just a few of the summative assessments that we use.
Thank you for watching.
All right.
Okay. All right. So, see, there were a lot of positive comments in the chat from that video. And again, it's another video on the Real Co-Teachers of Virginia section of TTAC Online that Dr. Lee gave you the link to earlier. One thing we wanted to go back to was this lesson plan that we were looking at earlier, formative assessment strategies. Student work from each station will be evaluated and used to form groups on day 2. What we want to caution you on is if you're using stations to assess student learning, make sure that you've planned for a way to collect data so that you can use that data for future planning. Because formative assessment is only as useful as the information you gather. You know, otherwise it's just a practice activity. So make sure that when you're collecting the data that you're going to use it to guide instruction. We're quickly going to go through the next 2 or 3 slides. Quality assessment checklist, the values and the information you gain from an activity for planning purposes about students' present level of understanding. Don't get too lost in activities themselves. Think first about how I'm going to get the information that I need from what I observe. This needs to be part of the design. What might I do differently based on what you find from the assessment data? All right. Avoid activities that could lead to misunderstanding. You don't want students to be making the wrong assumptions and maybe leaving with an incorrect understanding, because you can't undo incorrect learning. If that happens, then you're going to have to try to build new pathways that overcome that incorrect learning process. So there's a checklist here for quality assessments. We want them to clearly give us information about how well the students are performing. We want to tell the teachers how well all students are performing. They need to be easy to use. They need to be quick to implement. After you've used a quick formative assessment, stop and consider how effective your questions, propositions, assessments, and use of the assessments were. And consider the following questions along with other questions you construct help you get a better understanding of what worked and what didn't work with your assessment process. So you'll have these because you'll have a copy of the presentation, and we're getting really short on time. And we had planned an activity to let you adapt an existing lesson plan to a co-taught format. And Katie is going to take us now to the digital workbook and kind of fill you in on what we were hoping that you would be able to do. And we were hopeful that you will, when you have time, come back to the digital workbook and maybe practice doing this using that co-teaching lesson plan template.
All right. Pardon me while I bring up this other item for us to look at together. This is the last thing that we're going to cover today. Let's see here. Screen share. Okay, let's see here. All right, the digital workbook that we shared with you includes this slide here with some sample lesson plans on it. And I'll see if I can. You're going to be looking for our if for some reason none of these suit your purposes, you could use a lesson plan that you already use. We just wanted to have some samples available so that people have something to work from. But the idea is that you're going to be using one of the lesson plan templates that we shared with you today and starting to think through how to rework an existing lesson plan to fit a co-teaching model. So you're going to be considering a number of things as you're doing this. We want you to be thinking as you move forward about how formative assessment is going to fit into your co-taught lesson plan, what co-teaching approaches will make sense for each stage of the lesson, and also think a little bit about specially designed instruction, right? So when we talk about specially designed instruction, pre-teaching is a specific method that we talked about today. So you might look in the lesson plan that exists about for opportunities to do some pre-teaching. And finally, consider some common accommodations that you might find students need in your class. And often those are accommodations around reading, writing, or computation. So we are not going to ask you to break out and do this now because we have reached the end of our day. But do look in your digital workbook at these last few slides because it sort of will lead you through this little exercise. But you likely have a lesson plan that you're already familiar with that you could apply some of these techniques to. I think that just about takes us to the end. Chuck, do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. We'll just go to the time to share. I think we have time to let people do that.
I think so, sure. Let me then get that link out to everyone. We have, if you have an opportunity before you leave to add anything that you learned today to a Padlet, you can either access the Padlet through the last slide in your digital workbook, slide 8, or we have this link here, which I'm posting now to let you get to that Padlet. And the questions that we ask on the Padlet are one thing that you've learned about collaborative planning, 2 new ideas for formative assessment that you've learned. So check out that Padlet. And if you don't have access to a Padlet, I know that sometimes it can be challenging for folks. Oh, I see my phone is exploding right now with additions to the Padlet. So it's so great. So I can see that people are contributing. Feel free also to post things in the chat. And now we've got.
All right.